how to create a basic trouser block using our very own bespoke body measurements, and this week we're going to look at how to create some pattern pieces based from our block, and then we're going to cut the pattern pieces out of calico and sew them together to create our very first toile of our bespoke trouser block. I'll be showing you how to do this process step by step in detail. Don't forget, if you're at home, you can always pause if you need to take a minute to catch up, and do just feel free to post any questions that you have below in the comments. We always love to hear back from our maker community here at Minerva. So you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me here. We talked you through those in the previous video, and those products will be linked below the video too. Obviously in this video, my block is going to be different to yours, and so the shape of the trousers may well be different to yours, and that's okay. The principles of what I'm showing you and demonstrating today will apply to you. In this video, I'm going to be using a fat marker pen just so you can see what I'm doing on the screen really clearly, but at home, please do use a nice sharp pen to get your block and your pattern pieces accurate as possible. Before we start today, I should mention what I'm wearing, and that's the Rowan top by Megan Nielsen. That pattern is also linked below the video so that if you like the look of it, you can make your own. Okay, we're going to start off with our basic trouser block, and this is our front pattern piece. All we're going to be doing is adding seam allowances to the side. We're not going to add seam allowances to the waist or to the floor marking of the block, simply because we're not attaching the waist to anything and we're not adding a hem at this point. The purpose of creating a toile from your block is just to see how it's all sitting nicely. We're not finishing the garment properly, we're not doing any sort of refined pattern drafting, we're just checking the shape of the block to check for accuracy. So let's add our seam allowances to the pattern piece now. Starting at the waist, just draw in the waistline and the waist dart, tracing over the line as shown. Next, we're going to add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way around the curve down here. So I'm just going to dot that out to start off with, before I then infill the line. Draw in your inner leg side seam. At this point, we're just going to draw in our floor line for our block. I'm not adding a seam allowance as discussed. Add your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to the outer side seam. Don't forget that you've got a curve around this seam as well, so do just kind of dash that out or dot it out. Once you've added your seam allowances, it is going to be really helpful just to mark where your knee notch is. So just mark that on. Then you also might find it quite helpful to sort of annotate the hip line as well with a little single notch there and double notch here. Now our grain line is just going to follow this front trouser line at this point. It's running perpendicular to our knee line, our floor line and our hip line and waist line as well at this point. This is our basic trouser block front cut 2. And that is all there is to creating the pattern piece for your front trouser block. So we're going to cut out that pattern piece now and then move on to the back trouser block. Okay, so we've got our back pattern piece here. This is our newly traced over back pattern piece with the added extra volume that we added in at this point here. So we're just going to add our seam allowances as before. Grab some tracing paper and place that over your block. Starting up at the waistline, we're just going to draw that in simply because we're not adding a seam allowance to the waist. Draw in the waist darts as well. Add your seam allowance by dotting it out at the curve around here, and then infilling with a nice straight line. Add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to your inner leg seam, dotting out the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance as you go around the curve. Just draw in your hemline and don't forget that it's slightly curved down at the bottom, which is the floor line here. And then just draw in the outer side seam. Let's add in your notches along the knee line as we did for the front, so we've got some nice connection points there. And then we also did some notches along the hip line at the front, didn't we? So let's just do that as well. And we had a double notch here on that inner curve. Grain line just runs perpendicular to our knee line, our hip line and our waistline. Basic trouser block back cut 2. Now, the other thing that we have done, if you want to, and this is completely optional, is to draw in your stitch line on your pattern piece. What that does is it ensures that you have a little bit more accuracy when you're actually going to be sewing it up together. So if you want to draw in your stitch line, you're just going to dash over your original block line as shown. So just dash over it like this, all the way down, and just annotate that to say that it is your stitch line, and do that along both side seams and along the inner crotch curve. You can go back and do this for your front trouser piece as well if you want to. I think you'll find that will give you just a little bit more accuracy as we sew them together next. Excellent. Okay, so we've now traced over our back trouser pattern piece. Let's cut that out and then cut both the front and the back out of calico. Okay, once you've cut out your pattern piece out of calico, don't forget to cut out the notches, wherever those notches are on both pattern pieces. And then we're going to transfer our dart lines and also our stitch lines onto the fabric. To do that, we're going to use our carbon paper. We've cut 2 pieces out of a calico, so we can then just pop the carbon paper between the 2 layers of fabric, grab our tracing wheel, and literally just press down nice and hard as you trace over that dart line. And then you'll see that the dots are then transferred onto both pattern pieces. Okay, let's just repeat that whole process for the rest of the stitch lines. Once you've done the front and transferred all the line markings for the front, do the same for the back pattern piece as well. Okay, we're going to prepare the darts now. I've got the one of the front pattern pieces for the trousers, which just has 1 dart at the top. Now, as you can see, all of our little dart line markings are marked really nicely and clearly because we've transferred the line markings using carbon paper. So in order to pin it together, just pinch it together and just pin the very bottom, so like the base of the dart, perpendicular to sort of where you think the fold line is. And then next, grab a pin and put it through where you think the line of the dart is on that side. Flip it over and check to see if the pin has aligned with the dots on the other side of the fabric. If it's not, as mine hasn't, just manipulate the fabric until your pin catches and goes through both sides of the carbon paper dot lines. It's worth spending a bit of time just getting this really nice and accurate, because this is really going to affect the fit of your trousers. So once you've pinned it, it's been pinned on one side, and then if we flip it over to the other side, you can see that the pins are aligning really nicely with the carbon paper. So next we're going to start sewing up at the top where the raw edge of the fabric is, and then we're going to sew towards the point. We're going to reinforce the stitch line at the top as we sew, and then as we get to about 1 inch or a couple of centimetres before we get to the point, we're going to reduce our stitch length until it gets to about 1.2mm stitch length, until we get right to the end where we're then going to sew off the point, leave a tail of thread at the end and tie that into a knot. Okay, so there we have it, a line of stitches on one side, creating that beautiful dart, and on the other they're just about aligning with those dots there on the carbon paper, aren't they? You can see the stitch length has gradually got smaller and smaller as we've hit the end down here as well. Once I've done one dart, I'm then going to go and repeat the same process for all the other darts across the trouser pieces. We're now going to sew the front of the trouser to the back of the trouser. So I want you to grab the pattern pieces, and we're going to be inserting a zip on the left side of the leg as we wear the garment, so on our left side. So we're going to sew up the right side first because that's a little bit more simple. So grab the back pattern piece of the right leg and pop the front pattern piece of the right leg on top of it. And then, very simply, we're just going to pin the side seam together all the way along. Now, at this point, we're going to line up the top of the garment, and what we're going to do is we're going to insert our pins rather than perpendicular to the seam. We're actually going to pin them through those carbon paper dot lines again, just to create really nice accuracy. We've then got a hip line notch at this point, so pop a pin in at that point there. Just make sure that it's sitting comfortably and going through both of those carbon paper lines. Brilliant. Our next notch is all the way down here. And then, of course, we've got our hemline to line up. Now, the reason why we've done all those little notches like that is because we're then probably going to have a little bit of ease to work through. So I don't know if you can see that, but the curve of the fabric here, there's a little bit more on the back pattern piece than there is on the front. And that is exactly what we're expecting, because the back sort of has to come over more volume effectively as it moves around from our hips down to our legs. A bit more of a curve there on the back than there is on the front. So it's okay to just have to ease that amount of fabric in between the hip and the knee. Absolutely fine. So just begin to ease that fabric in and pin it so that you've taken that tension out of the back and distributed it easily along the front. Then just continue pinning in between the rest of the garment so that it's all nicely pinned together, nice and accurately. Brilliant. Once you've done one side, we can then go on and pin the other side too. Now, for the purpose of this video, I am using contrasting thread just so you can see it really clearly on the screen above, and because this is a demo, obviously if you're doing yours at home, just use some nice matching thread. The other thing you might want to consider doing, because this is a toile and we're checking it for fit, is you may just want to lengthen your stitch line so that it's maybe 3mm long rather than the standard 2.4, 2.5, simply because it makes unpicking a little bit more easy. And obviously this whole exercise is about fitting and checking the fit, so I'm expecting there may well be some unpicking to do at some point as you adjust the fit of the toile. So let's sew those seams together now. Brilliant. Okay, so there we've got it. We've sewn one trouser leg together, which is our right trouser leg as we wear the garment. Brilliant. We're now going to move on to the left leg, and this is the one where it's going to have the zip up the side. So we're only going to pin from the hem up to about an inch or two below the hip line to allow space for us to be able to open up the trousers, get in and zip them up. Okay, so we've got our back pattern piece laid out in front of us with the right side facing up. We're then going to just pop the corresponding front pattern piece on top, and we're going to pin all the way from the hem up to the crotch. Okay, so I'm just going to flip it over so I can pin the other seam, the other side seam. And we're just going to start with the hip line up here. Just line up those two hip notches beautifully. Just going to put a little reference pin in there to start off with. Continue to pin all the way down the rest of that side seam, aligning your notches first, your hemline, and then filling all the bits in between. At this point, I'm just going to use a double pin to mark where I want to stop sewing my line stitches down the side seam. So about an inch or so below the hip line, I'm just going to pop a double pin so that I remember to stop sewing at that point. Okay, so let's sew those two side seams together now. Lovely. So we've now sewn both of our legs. What we're going to do is just grab one pattern piece and turn it right side out. Okay, so this is now right side facing up on the screen, and what we're going to do, this is the back pattern piece. This is also the back pattern piece on this side here. You can tell that because it's got the double dart at the back. What we're then going to do is grab this one and feed it into this one, making sure that our two back leg pieces are lining up when they sit flush against each other. Okay, so now we're just going to pin that crotch seam together on the front and the back. So the two back curves are going to be joined together and the two front curves are going to be joined together so that they form one consolidated front piece and one consolidated back piece. So we've got the right sides together. This is the two back sides facing each other right now. I'm first of all just going to pin them at this crotch seam down here. Make sure that you're pinning directly through all of those nice little markers, and these two should line up absolutely beautifully. You have got a little double notch here where our hip line was, so just join those up nicely. And once you've done the back side, we'll just continue, flip it over and just continue to pin the front pieces together. Okay, let's sew that together now using our standard seam allowance and following our stitch lines. Brilliant. Once you've done that, you can then just press that seam that you've sewn just towards one side and that will be it, finished. Okay, so there we have it. Our front right sides are joined together at the centre front down there. We've got an opening on our hip left side and we're now going to go and try those on. They look great actually, don't they? Can't wait to try that on and give it a go. Really exciting. Okay, great. So we've finished drafting, we've finished sewing our first file of trousers. I am not expecting those to fit you perfectly. By no means. There's definitely going to be changes that you're going to need to do, as is normal when you are pattern drafting to create a bespoke block, because you know it is bespoke, isn't it? So go away and try those on, analyze the fit, and over the next couple of weeks I'm just going to be talking you through some standard fit alterations specifically for trousers. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found that really enjoyable and fun. It's been great fun to look at sewing up those trousers and such a beautiful result at the end too. I've been Izzy at Minerva. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.